I'm Allie Pinion with Dreaming the Bee, and I started this Bee Guardians gathering as well because there's not a local one here. I used to drive a couple of hours. I've been to 5 different beekeepers groups, and nothing just really fit for me. And so I decided I was just going to start something that I could share with other people. And so I'm super glad that you could all be here. And if you would like to ask any questions throughout the talks, because I know that a lot of you don't keep bees yet and you're interested, you can just type your questions in the chat. Um, and our last month's topic was different styles of beehives. And you can go and find that meeting on YouTube if you go to my YouTube channel, Dreaming the Bee, which I'm trying to add more content to and some shorter videos that go a little bit more into depth in some of the things that I might talk about in these meetings. So if that's one of your beginning steps, is kind of deciding what type of beehive that you would like to have. So when I do hive tours, when I go and visit the hive myself, I like to start by showing the bees that I would like to be in relationship with them. And so, still having a few more people entering, so I'm just going to talk for just a little bit longer before we do our little bee meditation. But I'll tell you why I do it. I think that it's really important for us to be centered and to be present in our bodies when we work with bees. And one reason is that's just out of respect, you know. And another, probably one of the main reasons, is that bees can sense fear and they can sense anxiety, they can sense nervousness just as a dog or a horse does. And so if we can kind of bring down our level of nervousness and bring down our level of anxiety, we can be better beekeepers, and we can build better relationships with the bees. And the bees are going to be so much more calm because they realize that we are more calm. And so now I want everyone, if you feel called, you don't have to do this, but to just close your eyes and take a deep breath. And we're going to do 3 hums on the out breath. And this is just bringing us down into our bodies, and just a really good way to get centered and to get started in the meeting. And that just kind of helps our nervous system get on a more calm level and activates our vagus nerve, just really brings us, you know, more in touch with our bodies and our feelings and our sensitivities. I'm going to talk about different equipment that you may need and that you may not need. And I think that it is important for you to start with, you know, a bee suit or a jacket. But I also feel like it's important to kind of shed those things as you go, because the more sensitive you are, the less likely you're going to kill bees. And the less, like, by smushing them, and the more likely the bees will be calm and gentle with you. In particular, when you're opening up a Langstroth or those box style hives, and you take the whole roof off the top of the bees, you know, you might have lots and lots of bees flying at your face. And when you've taken those deep breaths and you're calm and you're centered and you have your veil over your face and you know that you're going to be safe, then you just show them that you're calm and they'll respond accordingly. Okay, so Another few things that you want to think about when you're starting beekeeping is what style of beekeeping would you like to work with? So, a lot of this can be determined with the style of hive that you're wanting to work with. So there, some of the beekeeping practices, I don't particularly say that I'm in one practice because I don't really care for labels that much. I like to kind of learn from a lot of different places. So Darwinian beekeeping, that's kind of a phrase coined by, I think, Thomas Seeley. Then there's organic beekeeping, naturally grown beekeeping, biodynamic beekeeping, treatment free, bee friendly, sensitive beekeeping. And if you just search for some of these topics and these keywords, you can find books and different things about it. I recently, excuse me, I recently just got this biodynamic beekeeping almanac, which is really neat because it tells you, what days to plant root crops or fruit crops or harvest them. But it also has beekeeping information in the back. So, what days bees might be more likely to be agitated, or what days they might be more likely to be building comb. Um, I have a resources page on my website. I don't have this on there yet. I will add it, but I like to kind of work with some of the books and resources that I put on there before I do. But I'm sure I will be adding that one soon. And then another book I think that is really good. This one is on my resources. Is The Backyard Beekeeper. This is just a really basic intro to everything by Kim Flodham. And then I also feel like it's super important for you to just know about the biology of bees. And The Buzz About Bees is a really great book. It's also a good book to show kids pictures and adults too. So it's got some really good I know I really like pictures in beekeeping. When you don't have a mentor with you on site, it's nice to have, some really pretty colored pictures. Lots of books have lots of black and white pictures, and they just don't really compare to the colored pictures when you're beekeeping. Um, yeah, so I'm going to try this new thing that Zoom has just added this week where my picture pops up on the share screen. So let's see how it works out um, with my slideshow. Oh, there I am. Okay. All right. Let's see. It is kind of weird looking, but put me over here. And like I said, if you have any questions, just put them in the chat. And there are no dumb questions. Please don't feel like anything you might want or wonder that is silly, because it's not. I mean, many beekeepers that have been beekeeping for 30 years will say that they don't know much at all about beekeeping or about bees, because bees are just such incredible creatures. And that's part of what drew me to keeping bees, is I am a lifelong learner. I am a bee geek, is in the bee world. We call ourselves beaks. But anyway, that's one of my favorite things about bees, is there's always something to learn. So let's talk about hive location. I think one of the first things that you need to check on is your neighbors. Like when you are siting your hive, you would like it to be facing southeast, ideally, so that it gets that morning sun and it heats that front face of the hive up so that the bees can fly out early morning. Um, they really like to get going earlier in the morning, and they'll fly late at night. Even on a full moon, they might go late into the night, especially if the honey flow is on really strongly. So talk to your neighbors, see if they have bees, because that's a really important thing, especially if you're going to try to catch swarms. You really don't want to catch your neighbor's swarm, because that's their bees, and they might want them back, or they might be like, yes, please take the swarm. And then your neighbors might have a swimming pool, so that's another thing. Bees are going to be looking for sources of water. And if your neighbors aren't really cool with bees, then you might want to build a fence that's a little taller, so that when the bees fly, they have to kind of fly up and over their yards. And so it's really important to check on, if you're in the city. A lot of times counties don't have these sort of zoning and regulations. But if you're in the city, you might want to check your local zoning and regulations. Some cities require a certain amount of footage between the property line and where your bees are sitting. You really don't want to have your bees at the bottom of a hill that might be like a cold pocket or a damp pocket. Um, and also think about where you're going to be walking and where your dogs might be walking. What is the traffic like? You need to give them a good, 15, 20 feet to walk, to fly. Because in, when nectar season is in full force, it's like a bee highway. I like to actually lay a blanket on the ground and just watch them fly over my head because it's super cool. But you don't want to run into that. You don't want to be in their way when they are doing their thing. So, and then we want to lift your hives off the ground. So about 2 to 3 feet is a good length, height. And bees in the wild actually like to be about 15 feet high. So really the higher the better, but our backs and bodies can only handle so much, especially if we're working with Langstroth hives. And there are all these sort of fancy hive stands out there. But I just use concrete blocks. I really like concrete blocks. They hold up really well. They are, weatherproof. I can move them around pretty easily. I mean, they are heavy, but I really like them. And I use about 2 concrete blocks on each hive. Um, so bee water. In my backyard, I actually use a. It kind of looks like a bird water, but it's actually a bee water with a little bit of a shallow dish, and I put rocks and crystals and petrified wood and little sticks over it because it's really important that you have a space for the bees to land when they do fly to get water. Otherwise, they're going to drown, and you you're it's important to give them some water if there's not a pond or a lake nearby, because they're going to start drinking water everywhere they can find it. Maybe that's an old tire or a place where oil has spilled and collected and water's collected there, or your neighbor's pool. If you have a swimming pool, there's a thing called a frog log, and I think it's froglog.com. And what it is a little pad where frogs can get out of the water, but it's also a place where bees can land, and they don't drown. Because if you're not providing them a water source and they see that swimming pool, especially if it's a saltwater pool, they really like those minerals. And I mean, you hear about sweat bees, right? They're taking those salts off of our bodies. So this in pictured here is a chicken waterer. This is a 5-gallon chicken waterer. And you can see I have added some rocks, some river rocks for the bees to land on here. And in a hot summer's day, a regular sized established colony can drink a gallon of water a day. And if you don't keep that water filled, they're going to find a new spot, and it's going to be harder to get them to come back to the old spot. So water is an important thing, and it's not just being put out there for your bees, but also native pollinators and birds too. They all need a nice clean source of water. And another thing that I have linked on the resources page on my website is Spikenard Bee Sanctuary in Virginia. They have a biodynamic bee tea, which they have like chamomile and stinging nettles and valerian root and lots of different really nourishing herbs for bees. And so you don't really want to put that in like your water space, because then you have different bees coming to drink from it, and that could spread some disease. But it's just a good thing to know about, and you could feed that inside one of your hives. So what I have is in my lay-ins and top bar hives, I have a follow board, And I use those little push pins like you put on a bulletin board so that there's a space that the bees can crawl underneath the board, and then they can drink from that mason jar upside down, with some holes punched in the lid, and I use like two little sticks and then set the mason jar on top, and that mixing that with water and honey and making a bee tea and putting that inside the hive. And then they make, feeders for Langstroth hives that you can buy. So spacing. In Thomas Seeley's book, you'll notice I talk a lot about him because I really respect him. He has done 30 years of research on wild bees. He's written Honeybee Democracy and The Life of Bees, which are two great books. I think they're both on Audible, but it's really nice books to have as reference books as well. But he says that bees really need about a half mile spacing. And, if you're going to have them in a bee yard, put them at least 10 feet apart. So this is my bee yard. This picture I think is a couple of years old actually. And you can see I've kind of staggered the beehives. I have some of them facing different ways. I'm really just doing some experimenting because I really am a nerd like that and I like to experiment. Um, and they're not in this picture, but maybe in another picture you might see later, there's two hives side by side. And the reason why I do that is when I make a split, which is when you take basically part of the hive and put it in another hive so that that one side of the hive will raise a new queen, and so that the foragers coming back will split up in between the two hives and I can have enough foragers in both colonies. And then what I do is after a little while and that colony has built up, I'll move that hive to another location. And moving hives is a whole other thing. They say you either need to move bees 3 feet or 3 miles, and there are ways to get around that by putting some sort of obstruction in front of the beehive so that they have to reorient. Because when bees fly outside of their colony for the first time, they do this figure eight style flying. It's like this beautiful dance. And you'll see that when new foragers come out, you'll see lots of bees just doing this really beautiful dance in front of the hive. And that figure eight is how they're orienting themselves to the angle of the sun and where their hive is, so that basically wherever they fly, they know how to get home. So, that's super cool. Your next thing to seriously consider is how many hives you're going to do. If you are living in a city and there is, you have a small backyard, I would say 2 hives. I wouldn't really do 1 hive anywhere, honestly, because if you need resources, then you are able to pull resources from another hive. I think everywhere needs to have at least 2 hives. I probably wouldn't go more than 2, 3 at the very max. I have 2 hives in my backyard, and I had 3, and they were doing just fine. But I think I'm going to go back to 2 this year. So one of the ways that you can tell about how many bee colonies that you can put on any piece of property is how many native bees you're seeing. So if you have, this is actually on an organic vegetable, fruit, and flower farm. So they're all together with my beehives and neighbors' beehives. There's about 20 colonies out there, and they are all doing really well. And that area can sustain that many colonies. But if you don't have, lots of flowers, lots of trees, actually trees provide a lot more food and medicine for bees than flowers do. But you want to look for, forages to make sure that there is enough for bees, depending on how many colonies that you want to put on. And then when you stop seeing native bees, then you know you have too many colonies. When you stop seeing native pollinators, you know you have too many colonies and you need to cut back. Um, so honeybees are not native. They have been living in the U.S. for probably around 200 to 300 years. They were brought over with when the colonizers came over to America. So they have, naturalized themselves, and they do really super well here. But they are not native, and they do displace native species. So as we are bee guardians here, we really consider the native species of bees. And I have this book that is well, I don't think you can see it. There it is. The Bees in Your Backyard. And this is another really fun book for kids because you can ID bees that you find and pollinators that you find. This is on my my book resources page. There's an Amazon link to it. So yeah, really be mindful about your native bees and native pollinators. So siting hives. I like to put wood chips underneath all of my hives. There is a relatively new thing now about eco floors. And what an eco floor is basically another floor under the hive that you fill with debris. Debris being decaying leaves, decaying wood. And what that does is kind of mimics what a bee colony inside of a tree, the habitat that might be there. And so, what my take on that is, my husband is an arborist, a tree climber, and tree preservationist. And so, he has a wood chipper and he has all these amazing wood chips. And so, I put those underneath all the beehives. And what this does is there are several. What we call roly-polies, pseudoscorpions, earwigs, all these things that are really beneficial to bees and have a wonderful symbiotic relationship. And so what this does is provide habitat for these other insects, bacteria, fungi that really support the life of the bees. And we don't really think about it, but mushrooms are also super important for bees. So when bees are living out in wild colonies, they are typically in a tree that is decaying. They actually look for trees that have been struck by lightning. I should say they're smelling for, because they don't see as well as they smell. So they're smelling for that burned out smell of a tree cavity that might have been struck by lightning. And you see what happens when a tree is in decay stages, then fungus starts to grow. And the bees will actually collect enzymes and secretions from these mushrooms, from these funguses, as part of their immune system. And it helps them, in particular, reishi mushrooms. Paul Stamets, this famous mycologist, he, if you haven't seen his new movie, Fantastic Fungi, it's a really great one, and he talks a little bit about bees in there. But he's been doing all these studies with bees and mushrooms, and he actually makes a bee mushroom tea. And I think you can buy little packets from him as an immune support system for the bees. So, yeah, I feel like wood chips under the hives kind of mimics that ecofloor or that forest system. So in my bee yard, I have, I end up having to I have to put more wood chips out there at least once a year, sometimes twice, because the grasses will grow over them pretty quickly, especially in certain spots. But it's a really great way to kind of mimic the natural system as much as possible. The next thing is making sure your hives are level. I actually keep a level inside my bee bucket, and I have a picture of that coming up later. And this is important because when you have bee frames, or the frames that the honey and the brood and everything is drawn out in, if you don't have foundation in there, which I don't, I don't believe the bees really like foundation. But if you don't have foundation in there, the bees are going to kind of draw that comb in a level way. And if your hive is not level, you're going to be dealing with some cross combing, which is not a bad thing, but it is a messy thing. And so by keeping those hives level, you can keep your combs as organized as possible. I mean, the bees are going to do what they're going to do. They know how to live in the way that they know is best. They are actually, when you see combs making these funky shapes, what is happening is they are controlling the airflow inside of the hive, which I think is just super cool. So, when you see a comb that's doing this crazy little wiggle or, takes a hard turn, it's because they are aiming airflow in a particular way. They are ingeniuses at airflow. I was listening to this talk by Les Crowder earlier today, and he was talking about this miner who he actually was a beekeeper as well and was studying how bees moved in air and in the hive so that he could do it the most efficient way for the workers in the mine shafts. So there's so much to learn from bees. Anyway, and then we talked about keeping the hives risen off the ground and what's in front of the hives. So okay, and another thing that we needed to talk about is when you have bees and you're in the city, you are really going to want to be careful about swarms. And so you might need to be checking on when the bees, oh, sorry, not that slide. And so when the bees are swarming, um, so that you catch that swarm. And I say this for many reasons. Bees that swarm in a city are very unlikely to make it. I think it's like less than 20%. So I have a slide a little bit later about some ways that you can kind of catch bees in a swarm. And our whole talk next month, which will be March, will be on swarm catching, which is going to be fun. That's one of my most favorite things about beekeeping is swarm catching. Um, so yeah, we're just thinking about in a city, if you're going to keep bees, to be watching when they might swarm, because you might actually want to do a split, which is when you take that queen cell that's about to emerge when it's been capped, it's going to emerge very soon, and just putting it in another box with some bees and let it think that it swarmed. Or yeah, we'll talk about it a little bit in a little bit about how to catch them. But that's just another thing to keep in mind. And let's see. Oh yes, so some of the sources of pollen that are going to be very important, early pollen and early nectar. Red maple is a really important early pollen, and so is henbit. I've seen so much henbit coming in. Red maple and henbit seem like the most. Red maple is kind of between a tan and a peach color, and then henbit and purple dead nettle are this really beautiful red color, and that's coming in right now. Willow is another early pollen source. Dandelion, borage. So if you're interested in planting for the bees, I just got this book today. It's called Plants Honeybees Use in Ohio and Tennessee Valleys, and this is a really cool book. And I don't know if you can see it, yeah, but it tells you the plant, the flowering time, and what bees utilize it for. Is it for pollen? Is it for nectar? I just got this book in today, so once I look at it a little bit more, I'll put a link on my website to that as well. I'm trying to make my website a place where people can really get good resources for beekeeping. And yeah, so this is a bee, a little native bee habitat that I made for Christmas gifts. Um, several years back, and I think this was the one that was at my grandmother's house, and my mom has this one now. But you can see the different types of bees, mason bees, that are living in there. So it's really important to have habitat for pollinators, not only, you know, flowers and plants and water sources, and making sure you don't have too many hives, but also to have some habitat for them. So they have Bee Built sells some bee hotels, and you need to change out these every couple of years, every year, depending on what, if you're using the little bamboo ones, especially every year, because they can get disease and pests in there, and you don't want to, you know, cause an issue. um some other things, if you're not going to do a bee hotel, you can, you know, leave rotten wood or rotten tree stumps in your yard, or decaying, I should say. Rotten doesn't sound as good. You can have standing grasses, because bees actually, native bees actually overwinter in hollow stems of plants. So, you know, having some places for them, you know, piles of sticks, bare ground. There's a lot of bees that actually bury themselves in the ground. So, you know, having some sort of habitat for our native pollinators is really important, and making sure that you're planting plants that are not just for honeybees but also the native bees. So, like bee balm, honeybees actually can't get to the nectar in the bee balm unless a native bee has come and chomped a little hole at the bottom, because the stem of the flower is too deep for the bee's tongue to reach. So, some other good plants that are great for native pollinators and honeybees are sunflowers, sage, rosemary, goldenrod, blueberries. There's actually bees that are just blueberry bees, and bees that are just squash bees in particular types. Yarrow, watermelon is a really important inner city crop for bees, because they don't have a lot of, you know, foraging plants. All right, so let's talk about sourcing bees. So one of the most known ways of sourcing bees is probably package bees, because that's what you're going to see like in beekeepers magazines, um, and advertisements and stuff like that. And by the way, while we're talking about that, I highly recommend these two. The top one is Natural Bee Husbandry, and they do 4 publications a year. And this is really more for the bee guardian. And then Bee Culture, which is just more conventional, but it also has really great articles in it. So these are two great resources, because there's a lot of bee magazines out there. But those are the two that I've done research on. And if you're only going to get one, I would go with Natural Bee Husbandry, but it's only 4 times a year. But it's really good. So, yeah, package bees. So what a package bee is package of bees is are they don't have any comb, any baby bees. All you're getting is a can of sugar syrup, which you can see this can right here. And then you're getting a box full of bees, and a lot of times they're coming off of almond orchards, and they're not all sisters. They're just a bunch of different bees thrown into a box. And then you're getting a queen. This is a little a queen kennel. I heard someone say, I love it. Most people call it queen cage, but I like queen kennel much better. So there's the queen kennel, and she's inside. And then there's a little piece of candy that's a plug. And the reason why they do that is because all these bees are not really happy, and they're kind of weak because they've come off of almond orchards, and they've already worked really hard, and they're not all sisters. And so this queen that's not their queen, that's probably been artificially inseminated, not all of them are, but probably in a package bee, they they might kill her. And so they put her in this queen cage, and she's got 4 or 5 attendants that feed her and groom her. And after about 3, 4, 5 days, she can eat her way out of that, or her attendants will help her eat her them way out of that candy plug. And by that time, they've gotten used to her scent, and they'll accept her. So this picture on the right here is when I was at Michael Bush's bee camp, and this is my friend Christine, I believe, shaking the bees into the box. And you kind of do have to shake them to get them out of the box. It seems like you would hurt them, but they're not hurt by it. It's not one of my favorite ways to have to deal with them, but it's really kind of hard to get them out of the package without shaking them around a little bit. So this is going to be really, besides swarms, you're another really good option. So this is a nucleus colony, and why they say call it nucleus is because the queen is the nucleus of the hive. And so it comes with a queen, it comes with a couple of frames of brood and honey. Typically, you're going to have brood in the center because the queen is going to lay eggs in a spiral. So you're going to have brood and then pollen and then honey. And you'll typically have 4 to 5 frames, and maybe 1 or 2 of those will be honey, and then the other few will be brood, and then you'll have a queen. And here's another queen kennel, and then you can see that little candy spot that they'll eat their way out of. Okay. Oh, wait, sorry. And then nucleus hives are going to be more of your local beekeeper. So if you are going to try to find a swarm, that's great. But if you want to go ahead and try to secure a colony for this year, I would start to look around if you can find your local beekeepers association. And on my website, I have a link that shows all the ones that are listed in the US. And you can't, they will typically, they have to register with the state if they sell queens and they sell nucleus hives. So you can look through that list and kind of call around and see who's treatment free or who's using organic practices or something like that. If you're interested in Mississippi, I have a great resource that I actually have 2 nucleus colonies reserved from him. I think I'll pick them up in April or May, and he does treatment free. They're great. I've got 2 queens from him, and I mean, those hives just lay like champs. So, anyway, a nucleus colony is what you're going to get locally, and or you could, ask a beekeeper friend if they'll do a split for you, and you're not going to have a mated queen like you would if you got a nucleus, or sometimes you can buy a virgin queen and it'll be a little bit cheaper, and that just means she hasn't mated yet. But you can ask a local beekeeper if you can buy a split from them, and they'll raise their own queen. And if someone's interested in that in our area, I can do that for you if you just be in touch with me. So swarms, this is another way that you can catch local bees. And notice every picture of swarm except for one that I have that was on the side of a building, it looks like a heart. I mean, like an anatomical heart. Isn't that amazing? I love it. And so in this picture, it's not the best picture, but this is called a Russian scion. And what this is burlap on 3 poles with some lemongrass essential oil on it. And what that is, it kind of draws a swarm to that space first before they move on. So you can put these up in your bee yard, or like we were talking about, if you're in an inner city place, you can put one of these up and try to catch your swarm if it's closer. So this is on Michael Bush's farm, and this is probably 20 yards from where his bee area is, his bee yard is. So he says it's worked for him. So that's a good way to catch. And swarms, like it's kind of like the package bees in that it has no comb, but not like the package bees. That is their queen. A lot of times it's an older queen, but she's refreshed when she gets back out in the sun because they live their life in the darkness. And so yeah, I love swarms. They are ready to go. They are full of honey, and they are ready to build some honeycomb. So sometimes you do have to supplemental feed them. So a lot of times I'll just take a frame of honey from another hive and put it in there. If not, you could make them some BT to help them get started. So installing bees, you saw shaking the package in that other slide. And then this was me moving a colony of bees from one top bar hive to the other. And basically what I did is I just took the frames and set them in the other hive, and then I put the box right in front. And bees want to walk up. So if you make it to where it's easy for them to walk up out of where they are, and then have your entrance, have your box propped up right where the entrance opening is, they'll walk right on up. And if they're not wanting to do it, you can just quickly tap on the box, and then they'll start moving up. It's like kind of like that shamanic drumming tap, that 4 to 6 beats per second, quick tapping, and they'll move. Yeah. So hive inspections. So you'll want to, the only really way to learn, you can read all the books and it's great, and I highly recommend reading as much as you can, watching as many YouTube videos as you can, but really the best way to learn is to just get in there and do it. Get into the hive. And like I said, when you first get into that hive, put your hands on the hive, hum, breathe, and tell them what you're going to do. Talk to them. Let them get used to your smell. It's important to really not wear perfume or just have eaten a bunch of bananas before you go into the hive, because they really don't like strong smells, and the banana smell is actually their alarm pheromone. So if you can just really get centered and get calm, because like I said earlier, if you take that whole top box off of that Langstroth, they're going to come flying at you. But if you have on your veil and you're feeling comfortable, then they will notice that you're comfortable. And another thing I recommend is to have a piece of canvas cloth that you put on that part of that Langstroth top where you're not working, so that it's not exposing them to all this light that they are not used to seeing. And also, that air, that atmosphere in their hive is really important to them, and that's part of their immune system. So when you take that top of that hive off, it's going to take them weeks to get back to where they were. It takes them about 2 weeks every time we get into the hive to fix the comb, to get that air back established how it was, to get the airflow how they like it, to propolize the spots that we unpropolized. So it is a big deal getting into the hive. But one of the things that I tell my my mentees, and one of the things that I tell the bees, is that, hey, I'm here and I would like to learn because I want to be a better beekeeper. Will you show me bees? Will you have patience with me? And, that's another thing that bees really teach you, is to listen to your intuition. And so your intuition, you might automatically get a yes, or you might automatically get a no, or you might get bees popping you in the veil on the face. Well, I feel like that's a no. So, just kind of learning your intuition, and bees will really help you with that. So here we have, on this side of the hive, this is the female larva, and so this is what we call the worker bee, or I prefer the term maiden bee. And on this side, it kind of looks like that old puff cereal, or popcorn or something. These are the drones, or the male bees. And then here is pollen, and then we can see larva here, and more pollen, and then this is all honey, capped honey at the top. And the difference between nectar and honey is that honey is dehydrated and then it's capped to store indefinitely. Nectar is not capped, and it has a high water content, and it can go bad. Okay, so here we have the queen right here. You can see she's a healthy looking queen with a nice long extended abdomen. Her wings look good and not really tattered. So before she swarms, the bees will kind of shake her so that she'll lose some weight so she can actually fly again. It's kind of sad, but they do that. And right here, this is a queen cell. So it's elongated, kind of peanut shape. That's a queen cell. And then if you see a queen cell that's kind of on the center of a frame, that is actually called a supersedure cell. And this queen is going to be healthier than a supersedure queen. And they will probably end up making another queen after the supersedure queen. And what a supersedure is they actually go and find another larva that was not meant to be a queen and turn it into a queen. This larva on the edge of the frame was meant to be a queen. So they know what they're doing, and they are if you're going to do a split, this is the kind of queen cell that you want to find because she's going to be healthier and chosen. Okay. Wait, no, sorry, I'm not ready for that yet. I've got a few more things to say here. So back to the doing inspections. So we want to think about having a more conscious relationship with our bees. And I'm actually going to do a whole other talk on relationship with bees that's going to come a little bit later. But just knowing that when you're working with bees, it just takes practice. It takes being centered, being calm, having intentions before you get into the hive, knowing what you're going to do. And, thinking about what the weather is like. Is it going to rain? Probably not a good time to get in the hive. Is it really windy? Is it cloudy? If it's a beautiful, bright, sunny day between the hours of 10 and 2, then you're more likely to have happier bees. And that's when you want to get in the hive. I didn't realize how much I had to talk about, so I'm going to have to speed this up a little bit. Okay, so I'm bringing up honey here because, we also get to enjoy honey when we're keeping bees. That's not, as bee guardians, that's not our main reason for keeping bees. But I wanted to show you that you really don't need equipment. I do have a fruit press here that I got when I started having more colonies. And I had a lot more honey. But at first I was using this little strainer here and a bowl and a potato smasher. And it works great. I put one of those potato cloths or like thin cotton cloths over it and just let it drain. And then if you want to eat something bigger, you get 2 5-gallon buckets. And on 1 5-gallon bucket, you just cut some holes, poke some holes in the bottom and prop it up and let it strain into another 5-gallon bucket with a honey gate on them. I think I have a honey gate on my website as well. But, 5-gallon buckets and a strainer. That's all you need. Or if you just want to do comb honey and you cut the comb, I use a little biscuit cutter. And these are like little 1/4 pint jars. Equipment. That's my bucket. And I take that with me everywhere. That stays in the truck. That has like a bucket organizer. I have all that on my resources page. A smoker. I don't really use a smoker very often, but it's a really important tool to have. So the only things that you really, really need are some sort of smoker. You can use a knife or a butter knife and a veil. And those are the only things that you really, really need. So you can get more and you can feel more protected and you can be probably a little bit more gentle when you have more equipment. But those 3 things are all you really need because you got button-up shirt and you got a pair of blue jeans. And just be cautious about bees on the ground and setting frames on the ground because bees like to crawl up, like I said. And so if you tuck your pants into your socks, they can't crawl up your legs. I can't tell you how many times I have had bees up my pants. They don't always sting you when it happens, but it does happen sometimes. And this is a little trick that I learned from Michael Bush, is this painter's, I don't know what to call that, belt pocket? I don't know, painter's belt pocket there. And you can see that darkened spot? That is actually a magnet so I can magnet my hive tool. And it's actually a pencil spot, but I just dropped a magnet in there. So that is one of my favorite things. That I take this to the bee yard with me every time with my rain. I don't know what that's called. Write in the Rain notebook, because you need to keep notes. They're important. And then I can sit my cell phone in there. I can put a queen clip in there, which is there we go. The queen, if you're catching a swarm and you see the queen, you can put her in here. Attendants can come out, other worker bees can come out, but the queen can't, and it won't hurt her. Keeps her safe. Okay, so there are different types of frames that you can buy if you're doing a Langstroth. There is foundationless, and then you can see there's a little guide right there. You can use popsicle sticks. There's the plastic already drawn out, and then there's the frame with plastic in it, and then there's a frame with a wax foundation you can put in it. Actually, they found that bees will draw the foundationless out first and quickest. So they prefer foundationless. They are making wax, excreting it from their bodies. So that's what they do. They want to make their own frame. I mean, their own wax, their own home. This is a foundationless frame in my lay-ins that's about 16 inches deep. There's another one that they've drawn out. And a lot of times you just have to kind of guide the frames back in. This is a little entrance gate that I really like, and I'm going to start installing on all my hives from now on, because what it does is it has a queen excluder, which I don't use that part, but it has the thing where you can travel and with the box. So this is a swarm box here, and the bees can still breathe, and then you can see they propolised this because they wanted it even smaller. Okay, smoker. Smoke is really quite disturbing for the bees. So the only reason why I use a smoker is, especially when I'm working with Langstroth hives, is to keep the bees off of the top where I might smash them when I put the box back on. So I have this, you can see this torch here. This is really great with a little propane, I get a little propane thing that you screw in, and I actually use that to clean out hives that are dead or wax moths got to, and I burn it and scorch it. And then this is cow manure. Any herbivores manure you can use because it burns really long and really well. You don't need to buy the smoker pellets. And then I make these little bundles, little cedar bundles that burn really well. I like to put herbs in my smokers, kind of like an offering to the bees. Also, it smells a lot better. The ancient Egyptians used to, they would actually just smoke bundles of herbs on the bees, because they knew that's how they could get the bees to retreat and harvest honey. And it was actually where our first records of incense come from. And then you really don't need a bee brush. You can use a feather. Oh, another thing I didn't mention is when you're opening the hive, be careful not to like breathe right into the hive. They really don't like our breath smell, first of all, but they really just don't like that airflow coming in like that. Especially, if it's on a windy day, they don't like that. And then more protective gear. You can see the kids' bee suits here. I highly recommend getting a full bee suit for children. The bee gloves for kids, I have the ones that I like, and the ones that I use are listed on my website. The bee gloves for kids, I have not found a good bee glove yet, but they are better than nothing. So highly recommend the full suit for kids. And I have links to those on my site. Here is a jacket that I have. It's the Ultra Breeze jacket, and it's super breathable. You can see this material, but it's got holes. I mean, it's just holes. And if you are beekeeping in the heat of the summer in Mississippi, it gets hot. And so I highly recommend that. I even have one on my website for kids that's listed. But then, so if I'm going to do a cutout or a bee extraction, I will wear my jacket. I will bring kitchen gloves or just disposable nitrile gloves, and then I'll wear painter's pants. Full bee suits are expensive. So I think you can get away with not having a full bee suit. And if you're really, afraid, then get some of those white painter's pants. But I would go ahead and splurge on the Ultra Breeze, and I have a link to that under the resources on my website. But now you can see my transitions. This was my first bee veil here, and that one is super awkward. And this was my second one here, and it just fits on any hat, and it's really not made for women. And then this one, my mom just got me for Christmas. That's my mom there with the pink one. And this is my new most favorite veil. It protects you really well. It's got a nice range of vision, and this is by Bella Beek, and she's bellabeek.com, and I have a link on my website for her. Okay, I know I'm giving y'all just a few minutes for questions. I tried to run through that as quickly as I could, but there's so much information to talk about. So, are there any questions that anyone would like to ask? You can put it in the chat, or you can turn on your video if you would like. I know I just ran through a lot of information, and you're also welcome to email me if you have any questions or comments on anything that you might like to see in future meetings. But yeah, that's beekeeping is a lifelong learning process, and there's something that you can learn constantly, and I love it. I love helping people get started, and yeah. Anyone have any questions, or did I just cover things so well? Well, okay. The March meeting, I think is probably going to be the last week in March. And it will be on swarms. So yeah, so I think it's going to be the last week in March. And then on a new lay-ins hive with a package, what do you recommend? Okay, so I think that is asking about just kind of dumping the package in on a new lay-ins hive. What I like to do is, if you have a little bit of wax or a little bit of propolis, or you might can get some from someone you know. Okay, you're asking foundation or no foundation. But in order to get them to stay, kind of giving some sort of bee smell in there, I actually don't use foundation in my lay-ins hives, and I don't have too much trouble with cross combing, honestly. I do use the frames that have the wooden dowel about halfway, and they'll draw that out really nicely. So I don't recommend using foundation, but if you want to, I would order foundation from Dr. Leo, because on horizontalhives.com, because he's sourcing it from Italy, and it has like the least amount of pesticides possible. And so Hattie wants to know how bee suit keeps you safe. So the bee suits, bees are looking for our orifices. So they're really looking for our eyes and our nose and our mouth and our ears. So when we have that veil on and it has all those little holes, well, the bees can't get to it. And so they might be buzzing and tapping around, but they can't get to it. And on the bee suits, there's all these layers. So this bee suit is 3 layers. And so the bees, they try to get to it, but they can't. It's super protective. And so that's why I was saying, when you're getting started, it's important to have these bee suits, because it helps you kind of get used to working with the bees. How frequent should we do hive inspections? Thank you, Teresha. I actually had that written down and didn't talk about it. So at first, you can do them every 2 to 3 weeks to learn about them. But depending on what type of hive you have, like if you have a lay-ins hive, you could get away with only doing 4 inspections a year. Some people will only do 1 a year. If you have a Langstroth hive, you're going to have to do more inspections. So, during honey flow, you might have to do 2 a month, or I don't like to look at my hives at all, open them up at all, basically November until we get a hot spell in February or March. I like to leave them alone. They do better when we don't interfere, but there are times of the year where we need to give them more space, more boxes. So like I said in the beginning, you're going to want to go into the beehives more often. So, every couple of weeks, every 3 weeks, so that you can learn what you're looking for. Any limits on how many miles from where you live is okay to capture and relocate a swarm? I would, as long as you don't have another beekeeper that is keeping bees right there, and if you do catch a swarm, just ask them, are these your bees? But I get bees anywhere, catch swarms anywhere. Um, Now, I'm not quite sure what you mean relocate. Is okay to capture and relocate. If you're relocating them to your bee yard, I think it's fine wherever you can find them. Okay, how many frames should I start with? I have Dr. Leo's foundation ordered. Okay, so if you want to do uh, staggered, so you can do one foundation, one without, one foundation, one without. I would start with about putting a package of bees, about 6 frames, and then a follow board, and then let them fill those out. Let's see, what are you looking for when you're opening for a hive inspection? So that slide we went to that had the brood, let's see if I can pull it back up. The brood, we're looking for brood, we're looking for honey, we're looking for pollen, we're looking for eggs, and the eggs might be a little bit harder to find at first, but you'll kind of get an eye for them, and you'll see the larva, the eggs. So this is what we're looking for. We're looking for capped brood. We're looking for uncapped brood, this larva, because we know there's a queen. And then if we see the tiny little eggs in there, then when they're standing up, they've been on end, that's a day-old egg. And when they start to fall over, 2 days. When they fall over and make a curve, that's 3 days. And so that's what we're looking for, and we know that there's a queen in there, because we're looking for the queen when we're looking for in inspections, because we know it's a healthy hive. And a lot of people say to cut out your drone brood. Don't cut out your drone brood. Let your drones lay freely, as they should. No, not let your drones lay. Let your queen lay drones freely. Those drones are needed for diversity in bee species. Thank you all. I'll still take questions but I know we're running a little over. How long can the swarms stay in the swarm trap? Okay, so my swarm traps have 6 frames. I actually let them draw out about 4 or 5 frames before I pull them out. And the reason, unless it's hot. Now, if it's hot, I will go ahead and move them over. But the reason why I keep them in those swarm boxes is because, one, they can defend it because it's smaller. And two, because, well, yeah, mainly because it's smaller and it's easy because they're already in that box. But if it's hot, those swarm boxes are much thinner wood, and they are overworking themselves trying to keep it cool. So I would just go ahead and move it. If it's 90 degrees, I'd go ahead and move them into the full lay-ins with a follow board and keep them, around 4 to 6 frames. And then I always like to keep 2 empty frames. So if they've drawn that out, I keep 2 more empty so that they don't ever run out of space. And you don't have to go into the hive and pull out frames every time and find the queen every time. That can be really disturbing for the hive. But at first, you do need to learn how to do that and learn how to find the queen. So, don't be afraid to do that. Just tell the bees, hey, I'm learning here. Please give me grace and patience. All right. Thanks, everyone. I'm so happy you all came and let me talk about bees for an hour. My favorite thing to do. Yeah, if there are any more questions, or if you just want to email me later, love you too, Mom. Thanks for coming. And you're welcome to email me. I'm not always the best about getting right back, but I will as soon as possible. Hey, Felicia, glad to see you here. And I am more active on Instagram than I am on Facebook, so you're also welcome to message me there. And yeah, local folks, I can help you with swarms and getting things started. And also, if you don't know how to get started or you want to be mentored, ask a local beekeeper if they'll put bees on your farm, or you pay them to put bees on your farm or your property, and mentor you for a year and help you get started and educated. That's something I do around in our local area. I'm still on the slideshow. But yeah, so thank you all very much. Feel very blessed and honored to have you all here with me tonight. And if there are no more questions, I hope everyone has a good evening. And yeah, thank you all very much.